So welcome everyone. We can't hear your voices yet, but please put pronouns in your, if you know how to do that, and drop us some notes in the chat for anything else that you need to feel comfortable, or if you need to leave early, or anything you think we need to know to help you experience this. And thanks for attending.
Likewise.
So I guess we can, since we got full so quickly, we can probably kick it off actually.
Yeah, Ron, you want to cue PowerPoint?
Okay.
Unfortunately, we can't have our nice music on at the same time we have our slides up, so.
Are you seeing that full screen?
Yes, sir.
I'm seeing it. Looks great.
Okay.
Who made this? Whoa. So this is imagining post-abolitionist food futures, or food futures for short. I'm Fitzhugh Shaw. I'm co-host with my friend.
My name is Tacumba Turner. He, him pronouns. Educator, creative, and farmer. Fortunate enough to know Fitzhugh for last couple of years now, getting to work together. So excited about today and getting to imagine possible futures with you all.
Sure. Next slide, please. Let's see how well it goes. Maybe a little slowly.
Should have had the flex bomb. Ron, you click. All right. Next one.
So this will be the breakdown of our kind of workshop today. We'll start talking about the importance of stories and kind of frame the work, talk about imagination and play and futures. We'll talk about relationship of history to the contemporary, and that is when we'll talk about now stories we tell ourselves now. Then we'll play a game to talk about the relationship of history and the present to the future. And then we'll do a little bit more house cleaning at the end, invite y'all into some kind of imagination work that Tacumba and I have been doing, and some other stuff too. So we will get started talking about stories right now. Next slide, please. So we have a bunch of big questions that we're asking in this work, and we didn't want to do it in a way that felt like a drag. However, there's a little bit of, there's some major takeaways. So if y'all don't take away anything from this workshop, except for this slide, I think that Tacumba and I would feel pretty good about that. One of these questions is, what is time anyway? And physicists have a lot of answers for us. Native and indigenous traditions have a lot of answers for us. African diaspora traditions have a lot of answers for us. But we still have questions about scale, like we experience time on the scale of human life, but there's also deep time. We also have questions about the shape of time. A lot of us understand time as a line. Other traditions understand time as a circle. And Tacumba and I have this understanding that it's kind of like a spiral or a wave. And because of that, time elaborates or unfurls as kind of rhythm, where we can identify patterns, things that rhyme, but we also look at what's new. So we have this understanding of rhythms and novelty, also tensions, resistance, power, and the negotiation between those things. There's a famous quote attributed wrongly to Mark Twain that history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. We also have this idea of Sankofa in the African traditions, that you look back to look forward. The second major piece is this idea of imagination. So when we talk about abolition work, and we've been talking about that a lot today, we need to understand that abolition work is impossible without imagination work, that we need to be able to imagine new futures that are at a break or altogether different from the pasts that we inhabit in order to create abolitionism or to prefigure an abolitionist future. When we talk about futures, we have this understanding that there are probable futures, possible futures, and preferable futures. So we might need to actually shift the shape of the present in order to make a preferable future happen. And one of the ways in which we do that shifting is through imagination. One of the best ways we do imagination work, if you have kids especially, you know, is through play. And so when we play games, when we imagine things newly, we can ask ourselves political questions like, what about today needs to be pruned? What needs to be propagated? What don't we know that we need to know, and so on. And when we play, it's actually easier for us to abandon our ideologies, abandon our dogmatism, and kind of like get into a space together where we can suspend disbelief, even if only for the time that we're doing that inside the game. So we're gonna ask y'all to do that today, like a little bit of kind of just being wacky and fun, even though the point of that can be to do real deep personal work and deep social work. Also, when we have conversations, which we will later, we really insist on a kind of nuance and active listening as the basis of our conversation together. So like really hearing each other, and also really, I want to say like complexifying, which is a word I think Bell Hooks introduced me to. So complexifying our ideas. And then I have this wonderful quote from Octavia Butler that I love about how stories work. Next slide, please, Ron. So I won't be talking much longer, but I did want to talk a little bit about history. The master's work that I did was all about food history, and an idea I call food power, which is that food represents the movement of power throughout history. In fact, it's the main way that power operates. And so I want to first tacitly admit that this is a story, right? I'm telling a story, Tacumba is telling a story about how history works. And you don't necessarily have to believe this, but this is how he and I, with some probably some major disagreements between us, but also some major agreements, understand the movement of power through food in history. So we have this kind of point where at point one, plants are first domesticated and humans began doing agriculture. This leads to building cities. It also leads to like large scale food sacrifices and food-based religion based around food. But one of the resistance point to this is actually, and archaeologists have no explanation for this yet, that all the major cities before the year 5000 become abandoned. Like people leave cities, perhaps because they're not such big fans of hierarchy. We don't know. But there are these navigations of how power and food intersect, even in prehistory and early ancient history. A next inflection point is the development of imperialism and kingship and like real hierarchies based around food, particularly grain agriculture. Societies without grain agriculture don't develop hierarchies, which is really interesting. One of the ways that rulers operate during this period is that they successfully separate people from their sources of food and from making food. So they might take over and tax fields of grain, or they might take people out of rural settings into urban settings where they rely on kings to give them food or something like this. But one of the fugitive states around this point is this idea of barbarians, that people actually escape civilization to return to non-hierarchical spaces. There's also this cool thing in the Roman Empire called cessatio plebis, where any plebeian, like any laboring person in the whole city of Rome, like would general strike basically and leave the city of Rome, and then like the city would collapse, and they had to, the ruling classes had to figure out like how to get them back, and so they had to meet their demands. Then we're kind of like coming up onto the current day of like maybe 500 years ago, or at the beginning of global capitalism. Capitalism and mercantilism are really based entirely around, or I would say quite a bit around food theft. So not only dispossession of land, but also dispossession of people. In the point of those being combined is that you produce commodity crops like sugar or rice or corn and things like this. And what I have here is this idea that we talk about a carceral society. A lot of abolitionists talk about a carceral society. And it's my feeling, and Tacumba and I have talked a lot about this, that the seeds of the carceral society are really planted in the 14 and 1500s through food dispossession, basically, and through the creation of a global commodity system. Oh, one more, sorry. The last piece, or I should say, there are quite a fugitive movements around that. Many of us know of the Maroons, escaped enslaved people who create their own societies. Many rebellions all over the world, such as the Haitian Rebellion. And then just the simple maintenance of pre-capitalist and traditional foodways is an incredible form of resistance. Today, we see a lot of these currents, a lot of these power and control currents maintained through industrialized capital, through finance capital, and the way that food intersects with those. There's this idea that some second wave feminists have come up with, housewiferization, that food works to create the nuclear family, which many of us know is a kind of control system. And this idea of food from nowhere, that many of us are deeply alienated from the sources of our food and through all the processes that food goes through to get to our plate. And the fugitives from that, like, you know, us, many of us do fugitive and abolitionist work in this time. Ongoing resistance, indigenization, post-colonialism, all of these sorts of ways of engaging power complexes through food or in resistance to food control, that's all fugitive and abolitionist work. I hope I'm not over time. Am I doing all right?
Doing good.
Okay. Now I'm ready to go on, Ron. Thank you. One of the main questions that Tacumba and I have around this isn't really that we are interested in nostalgia, because we know that there's no golden age, and we know that there are times when people have lived better than they do now, and we know that people live better now than they have in the past. So we're not really asking what time is worse than any other, or is this the worst time to be in, or timeline, to borrow sci-fi terminology, but like, how do we get the tools we need to live the best we can now? And so we have this quote from Gilles Deleuze, who is a French theorist that Tacumba and I love. There's no need to fear or hope, but only the need to look for new weapons. Next slide, please.
So building off of what Fitz you've laid out, you know, I definitely want to give some light to the fact that this is impartial, right? Like, we are attempting to summarize a deep and complex history and story. You know, we're highlighting fugitives display a social rhythm and display great crisis and resistance. But, you know, I think it's important as we continue on to keep these thoughts in mind as we're having this conversation about time, particularly of past, present, and future. What are the relationships between these things? And how does a fascination or obsession with them, for instance, nostalgia, enable us or prevent us from, you know, realizing new solutions from knowledge that was gained, right? To think about, you brought up Sankofa, you know, which is the exploration into what has been known or what has been done, and bringing that into the present time for positive progress. I think with that being said, you know, we have to acknowledge there aren't relics. We can't, you know, these things aren't frozen in time. We must adapt them and play with them, and, you know, continue to reevaluate how they can be useful in our time. So I think that keeping them, you know, being with the context of the summit, which is reevaluating histories and perspectives, hopefully this can help with that. So next slide, Ron. So speaking to like discontinuities, you know, we've inherited tensions, ongoing alienation, as you put it, Fitz, inspiring current and traditional anti-systemic activity. There's clearly a need for new lens outside of victimhood and liberal agency. You know, the fractured food relationship we come from. So the role of our diet, particularly as a Black male, African American, native of Pittsburgh, you know, I do a lot of food work in my community, particularly in Homewood. And, I think this shows up across the board. So there's a tremendous amount of questions still about, the role of technology and being able to solve our problems. But I think it's important to keep in mind that 70% of the global food supply is still grown by small holders. All right, so growers continue to resist states and corporations, as we've seen in India relatively recently. The need for global land reform and demodification is important. So as we think about the future, even being able to challenge the lens we currently have, as it just being a commodity, we also recognize this as something that's, imperative to our own sustenance and nourishment. So, I think it's important to keep that in mind. And furthermore, just to wrap this part up, the role of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, Southeastern Asia, and subsidizing other regions. We talk about the global commodity chain. Not to mention the effects of climate mutation on food supply. So for various reasons, here in this moment, imagination can be a new weapon at the roots I'm alluded to. So we can move on to the next slide. So if we don't see ourselves in the future, how can we expect to play a role in shaping the future we want? This future is speaking back to us. We know it's our responsibility to give you strength when you might not make it through. All right. And we can move on to the next slide, please. So now Fitz is going to speak on how we're going to play today's game.
Oh my gosh, we did so good on time. Tacumba and I were afraid that the whole beginning was going to take us like forever because we go off on all these crazy tangents talking together. I told you, but yeah. Thank you. So all of that, suffice to say, when I talked about the contents of today's workshop, I mentioned there would be a game, and that was in the outline. All the stuff we just talked about is kind of the context. We're laying the terrain, or we're talking about maybe the things we'd like you to consider as you engage the imagination game, Food Futures. These are the things that Tacumba and I take into account when we do imagination work together. So when we play today's game, we'll have probably 2 rounds, actually not 3. So each time period will kind of time travel. So we will go into the year 2052. We'll go 30 years in the future, which is kind of at the edge of where we might know what the future will look like. And when we go into the future, we will share a Google form via the chat, and you'll be able to type in something that you found in the future. So it could be an object, it could be a verb, it could be a community, it could be an experience. And there are some other questions on the Google form, like what does this thing have to do with? Like what category does it fall into? And we'll show a slide that has some potential categories. So if you have any questions about that, you can see what that might look like. And then we'll have some more questions like, what problems does it solve? What problems does it create? Why do you think it's important to people who live in the future, and so on? And you can kind of flesh out your idea in that box. Then we'll ask people to share out. So we'll ask you not to submit the form so you don't forget all the cool stuff you wrote. And then you'll share out with the group all the stuff that you found in the future. And we'll also have a Jamboard link that we'll send out so you can draw your object. And then we'll discuss it. We'll have about 8 minutes to discuss things together. This will be after the share out. We can ask each other questions about make some money. We'll ask each other questions about all the stuff we found, how we think the stuff relates to each other, or whatever comes up, questions and so on. And I have the timing here for each of those pieces. It does feel a little constrained, and we apologize for that. We wish we had more time to do the fun stuff, but so is the nature of time that we're kind of boxed in here. Anyway, each round will be 20 minutes, I think, not 25. We'll have 7 minutes to imagine, 1 minute to share out personally, and then 8 minutes to talk together. Before we move on, are there any questions about this part? Because this is kind of, I hope, quite straightforward. Throw a question in the chat if you've got it. Then I'll leave like a minute or 30 seconds for you all to ask. Okay, so we'll move on. And if you do have a question though, please feel free to ask in the chat. So let's see what the next slide is. I'm as surprised as everyone else. Okay, so if there's any confusion about what I mean when I talk about imagining an object or bringing something back from the future, this is an example. So I thought of this idea that in the far future, bioroboticists will develop a global communication network made of tree roots. And this kind of tree, I call it the tree net, will connect humans and plant life all over the world. And the category for that is ecology, forests, how humans understand themselves, and also like community, because it'll bring us into community with plants. And then what else? So it helps solve problems related to alienation from the non-human world, also makes it more difficult for us to engage in environmental degradation, but it might raise interesting questions or difficult questions. It might create problems for people around how to live in the world without harming other living beings, especially if maybe we need to harm them. So that's a difficulty. Next slide, please. Anyway, that's an example. I hope that's helpful. So now we'll begin. Let me throw the links in the chat. So this link is the Google form. Tell me if it works. And this link is the Jamboard. You can draw your object. And if you want to like label your objects so we know which one's whose, that'd be helpful. Please throw in the chat if neither of those links are working, because I know Google stuff can be weird sometimes. And as you can see, the Jamboard, I see people joining, is divided into years. So if space is all taken up in one slide, like 2052, then just go to the next 2052 and find some space to draw. Are there any questions about this before I describe this future we're jumping into? Or is it all pretty clear for everybody? I forgot to put on my time traveling glasses.
Yeah, you might want to throw this back on.
Put them on.
Yeah,
Okay.
throw them back on.
It's to keep my eyes safe while I time travel. So 30 years in the future, we had this idea, Tacumba and I had this idea that there's kind of, actually Tacumba, this was for you to describe. I'm sorry for stepping on your toes. Do you want to talk about it?
So I'll just carry on where you left off. So, you know, in 2052, an abolitionist food future, transitioning away from harmful institutions. People are solving and addressing root causes of inequality, and colonists and development paradigms are fading. So in this future, what are some of the things what's something in particular that you can imagine bringing back, you know, and, you know, use the Google form to help facilitate your thoughts on that. Be interested to see what folks bring it back.
So if everyone is in the forum, you know, take like 7 minutes or so to imagine your object and write about it as much as you like. And then if Ron can click to the next slide, we have some ideas about what categories might look like. And these are just suggestions, like don't be limited to this at all. These are just ideas. But you can see that there's like a tremendous amount of possibility. here. Could be anything really. And I'm gonna go into the form and write my own thing. I was hoping this is where our background music would like be key, but
Yeah.
so, oh yeah, I didn't explain to click the year 2052 radio button before you start. And then if you feel like giving us permission to share your object via social media, then you can click yes at the bottom of the form. And if you don't, then that's totally fine, totally great. So there will be a lot of dead air, and that's okay. Throw on some music in your own space. Some futuristic vibey music to get the imagination going.
Well, why don't we, since it's going to be 6 minutes, why don't you just step back on the jams real quick, and then we'll, folks express needing a reference back for this, we can do that. But
Oh yeah, I guess I could throw, if I can share my music, Ron, or will that be too weird to? Oh,
we'll just swap back.
I can do it. Swap back.
You want me to take down the
I don't know if
slides?
it's-
Yeah, for the time.
Yeah,
we
let's
could turn
throw
this
some
to
music
slide.
on. Thank you, appreciate it.
No
Or
problem.
if it's Hugh, you could probably share for the moment this slide and your music, and then we could swap back when we're ready to move on with the slides.
Ooh, that's a good idea. Let me see if I can do that. This is so funny. We're all like in this new world now where we have to know how to do this stuff well. So also, if you're having difficulty thinking of something, just first thought, best thought. Just think of something wild and fun or something very mundane, doesn't really matter, and just explode it out. Sometimes our imagination muscles aren't really in practice, but that's okay.
Okay. We're not getting music.
Oh no, really?
Yeah.
It won't
I-
let me do both.
I also only have view access on the Jamboard. Can't
Hmm.
edit. If there's anyone else in the session who's running into that, could you mention it in
Let me, oh yeah, I don't see, no one's drawing. So let me do
Yeah.
this. Let me fix that. I appreciate you telling me. Okay, so let me reshare the link. Or if people want to try it now, maybe it will work. Maybe you can edit it.
Yes, looks like it works now.
Cool. So since we had some issues with the Jamboard, we'll take like 3 more minutes. And if you feel like making more than one thing, that's cool too. Do that. Oh wow, I can see everyone drawing live. This is so cool. We got about another minute. If you're jamming, keep jamming. If you're not jamming yet and you want to, then head over there. So we'll move into share out, but if you're still drawing or still writing, that's totally fine. Yeah, because you can keep doing that while you listen to other people share out and during conversation. We would appreciate you to submit it eventually so we like can see people's stuff because that's just fun for us. But that's also optional. So yeah, let's get into a share out. Can people unmute themselves, Smith and Ron? Is that possible yet? Like if I toss
I just
mic
enabled.
to,
I just enabled that.
cool, thank you. So like Tacumba, you want to toss the mic to someone?
Yeah, let's see. Emily Moss, would you mind sharing? What was your item for the future?
Hi, yeah, sure. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can. Thank you.
Hi, sorry. My pronouns are she and her. Sorry, I couldn't figure out how to change it.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Okay, well, thank you for telling us.
Yeah, I just want to
Cool.
let you know. So I use the verb deepen, and I related it to the category communal. So would you like me? Would you like me to unpack that a little bit?
Say more if you like, please.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So I volunteer locally at a farm, and I noticed this year, so as it felt like the world was shutting down, it was really nice to have this obviously like deeply earthy, grounded experience at this like private farm where the outside world ceased to exist kind of temporarily. And it felt like the rest of the problems in the world were for a moment or for a day, like imaginary. So for me, it was like this sense of agency and reclamation and homecoming and just focusing more on this like locus of control. Like, so I can't control what's happening out here, but I can focus on this earth immediately in front of me, and I can do something important and transformational in the space right in front of me. So a little bit of what I said about that included harkening back to local systems, cultivating interdependence with physical neighbors, sharing labor and gathering spaces and gardens, strengthening the collective. I see this as remedying personal isolation, cultivating a sense of agency, ownership, and pride, but possibly presenting these new problems or continuations of problems that exist now, which is removing emphasis from possibly limiting global awareness and or cooperation, contributing to othering people from outside your much smaller group now, and then limiting resilience and your ability to rely on people outside of your immediate space. That's it for me. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, thank you so much. Would you mind kicking it to someone else?
Oh, sure. You know what? I'm actually not looking at the list of participants right now. So do you mind picking someone?
Yeah, didn't occur to me.
I'll pick them.
Do you want to choose someone else, Tacumba?
Imani.
Hello.
Get on the mic. Hello.
Hi. I don't know how to see it anymore. Let me see.
Okay.
Let me try.
Remember anything about it?
I said to my husband, like, ooh. So my word for the year is imagination, right? And I'm like, ooh, the young people will hold you to it. Okay, I don't know how to see where I wrote something. When once I submitted it, I don't know.
Tacumba, can you pull it up?
Let me see.
Okay.
See
I was just happy that I was able to participate. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go with this. I have no idea.
So I'm gonna ask you the question, and then that'll help me find which one was yours. Okay. What was your object from the future?
I put that we would create greenhouses and like personal size greenhouses. Now I don't know where you are.
No, I got you. I'm with you. Greenhouse buildings, winter greenhouse buildings.
Yes.
Okay. So, and that, what is that related to?
In terms of that, hold on one second.
Like the categories.
Yeah, in terms
or
of
whatever categories you made up for yourself.
Hold on. I'm gonna make it bigger so I can see it.
No problem.
As soon as I figure out.
Did you do this awesome drawing?
I did the drawing. So
that's dope.
I don't know how. Okay, let's make it bigger. Okay, there it is.
You got it?
So when I actually just put together a lot of categories. So I thought about a home space. I thought about education also, and you know, the ability to be communal and trading. It wasn't really like one thought.
Yeah.
But I just thought about that this is a way to like in those many years that we would just have a way of being closer to our food choices, and having it be a part of our lives, like in terms of education. So I put in there somewhere, you know, just like children learn ABCs, that, you know, learning to do this would be a part of our lives that we learn throughout our development. So yeah, I didn't
Awesome.
choose one category.
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, that's perfect.
And so my picture,
and what are some problems you think that it helps solve?
I think it helps solve, you know, like food desert, but most importantly, it to me, I thought about just self-care, just even self-soothing, self-reliance, ways of creating, you know, of course, self-care, but opportunity for trade or, you know, entrepreneurship, or just a shifting in your thinking of community, connections, those type of things.
Do you think it creates any problems? Is there anything you could think of that might, like, down the road even?
No, but I mean, I'm sure, you know, there's always some type of antithesis. I didn't,
Right.
I did not think of that. I just thought of, you know, yeah, I didn't think of any problem. I thought, you know,
Cool. Thank you
if
so much for
somebody was
sharing.
homeless, you know, I
Yeah.
thought like, if you're homeless, but I also thought this would help even with homelessness, but because that picture I drew was something you could create like in your garage, you know, maybe you had, like I live in Chicago, it's cold. So that you could create this space with lighting. But if you're homeless, I still think that in Chicago, we have museums and they grow food as decorations outside, but homeless people are free to eat it and take it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tacumba, you want to choose one last person?
For sure. Let's go with Essie. Isa.
Hi, yes. The name is Essie. I just joined. I'm so sorry. So I'm actually not sure what's going on.
Okay.
All right.
Maybe if I can see somebody else discuss first.
Yeah. Thank you for
Yeah, thanks for letting us know.
All right. How about Marcy?
Oh, really quickly, as a note, this is one of the moderators. For people who just joined, I've just dropped the links in the chat for the activities that we're doing right now. So feel free to take a look there and catch up.
Thank you, Smith. Yeah, Marcy, and we're probably saying that incorrectly, so please correct us. All right, Marseille, or Mark, maybe? Or maybe if that person, yeah, how about Shelly? Okay, Shannon.
There, Shelly. Hi. And I have to apologize, but I did end up submitting my sheet ahead.
Oh no, okay.
So, but let's
go. That's a design problem on our end. Sorry about that.
No problem.
But yeah, please let us know.
Yeah, guide me through again. My object or verb, actually, I immediately thought about a hand and a paw together in a communal relationship between people and animals. And that led me to really explore animal kin, communal relationship, plant-based. And I know that's something currently, but I see in 30 years where this is going to be more commonplace, a plant-based foundation of good health for a number of reasons. First of all, it's whole foods. It's going to be less costly for all people. Okay, it's something that is sustainable, that everybody could grow. I still haven't, animals are going to be really happy with smiles on their faces from this. But I also see it as more available in more areas. So I drew a hand and a paw, not very creative. However, I'm also thinking, like, even now, I think there are areas where we should be able to have foods available. Okay, and not just soup kitchens, okay, but just everywhere out there. It might be something more frequent that we would see, and people would not be faced with such hunger.
Cool, thank you. Thank you, yeah.
No, you're welcome.
Tacumba, you want to take some time to have an open conversation, like 5 or 10, or what do you think?
Let's do 5 to 7 minutes. I think we'll still be on par to get everything in. So in hearing everybody else's future item, what things surfaced for you or arose in your mind as you were hearing folks share? And for folks who didn't get a chance to share, what are things you heard or things you want to mention now that you folks did get a chance to share? So.
And please popcorn, so volunteer yourself.
So I'll rephrase the question. What things initially rose in your mind? We would start from the beginning, right? Going through the game and just being that this is attempting to shift our thinking a bit in terms of imagination. What did you experience any initial challenges in imagining something? Or did it come to you immediately? Just curious to get folks' thoughts on their experience as they were imagining.
I'm just going to add something. This is Shelley, and I wanted to say that I love the idea of doing something creative, because to me, if you can do something creative like this, there's no limit. And it's also, I don't think anyone wants to ever say that's not doable. So I think it's just as much as we can imagine, we can do.
Yeah, thank you, Shelley. Perfect. Couldn't have said it better. And if people, felt like there were connections between the things that they invented or imagined and what people presented, or just anything, just kind of share out, please. Feel free.
This is Shannon, she, her pronouns. And just from listening to the people who presented, I was noticing some themes of very holistic objects, which makes a lot of sense to me because, food is this, I think somebody used the word nexus, it interrelates with everything that you could imagine. So I think when I started the exercise, it was, hard to narrow down on one given thing. So the categories were definitely helpful for generating different ideas. And then the other theme that I thought was interesting that came up a few times was this idea of decentralization, and kind of having webs or nets of networks that are, in my mind, less hierarchical and more spread out, so that power is more equally distributed.
Right. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Does anyone else want to?
I think that one of the things that came to my mind, and perhaps this is a negative thought, and is the fact that we probably are going to be facing more climate change in the next 30 years. And I think this is cause movement of peoples. And we're really pretty fortunate here in the Pittsburgh area. We have water, we have space, we can move, we can absorb people. I'm not sure how well we can absorb it within the urban areas, but we might be able to use some of our ex-urban areas to absorb peoples and repopulate communities in rural communities, which could very well be built around a communal food production and lead to new cooperative communities. Well, speaking of cooperative communities, I think of the Eden Farm project, the co-housing project that's being developed now. But of course, that's something that's being developed on a backdrop of a a large other organization, which you wouldn't have if we're going to be working with the pressures of movement of peoples from areas where they can't grow their own food and be independent. So we'll need to be, I think, developing systems that can spring up more organically, as you will, homegrown. I won't be here to visualize it. So good luck, guys.
Well, you know, that's the fun about time travels, because maybe you can check it out anyway.
That's right.
Yeah, right. No, thank you so much. Does anyone else want to, maybe one other person, jump in before we move on to round two?
I just wanted to thank you. This is Cynthia Grace. She is my pronoun. And I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity that you left it open, you know, to anything, because opportunity and to remake and rethink and reimagine, it's beautiful because it's limitless, right? There are no limits. There are only possibilities. And if we just imagine, we can create it. So I have to thank you for that. That's really like daring to leave it that open, but it was beautiful. I thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I appreciate that a lot. And I was just thinking as I was watching people doodling, like it'd be really cool if we could have all these multiple screen sharing, you know, so everyone could see everyone else drawing. And that was really inspiring to me that it got to be as open as it was and all the different things that people were thinking of. So yeah. Well, I guess I'm doing slides now.
Yeah. Kick off the next one.
Do this. So now we're going to jump ahead 75 more years. So 105 years in the future. I think very few of us will be alive still. So we're in a different realm altogether of what, you know, a lifetime is, right? And Tacumba and I have called this post-abolition period. So if we think maybe 30 years or 75 years in the past or 30 years in our future is this kind of like inflection point or this turning point where things begin to shift seismically, then maybe this post-abolition period, things have shifted. They're almost done shifting. So we might say something like, and again, these are all just kind of, this is all our imagination. So we might say that much of the ecological harm of the past 200 years has been halted or reversed. So the earth is healthy. And humans begin living off of the earth. We get it in our heads that maybe we need to live on the moon or in space or on Mars or wherever. This time period, we're really exploring fair distributions of technology. So maybe this is a highly technological society, maybe not. But regardless, there are questions around how to, questions of equity and how things get shared fairly and who gets what they need, basically. How does everyone get what they need? And then we have relationships with the biosphere and technosphere. So maybe that's a tension, making sure that we use technology in a way that doesn't harm the earth and vice versa. And then we have this question about profit motive. So maybe profit motive as a kind of mover of human society really begins to decline and people aren't really using that so much anymore. So this is 2127. And we're gonna take, again, we'll just take like 8 minutes to 7 to 8 minutes to fill out our form and imagine and jam. Again, if you need to like jam longer, fill out your form longer, no big deal. But in about 8 minutes, we'll start sharing out and then we'll have our conversation again. So here are our possible categories. And I loved that people just snagged from all these categories. So do that, you know, grab 5 categories, grab all of them, you know, do whatever you want, just as a jumping off point. And then we'll share out together and hopefully hear from some people we didn't get to hear from before.
Yeah, sorry in
Have fun.
advance. I totally misheard the instructions and I did 2127 for my first time. So I totally took over one of the pages. So I can try to
Well,
erase some of my stuff.
what you should do now is you should jump 150 years in the future to whatever time you want to. Star Trek times, 25th century.
Nice.
Imagine something amazing.
Well, feel free to riff off my Cookie Monster moon and have fun.
All right. Thank you for letting us know. Cool. Tacumba, do you want to put someone on the mic? You feel like it? You want me to do it?
No, I got it. Sure. So go ahead.
Maybe someone
And you just hopped in and didn't hit a chance to respond yet. Just let us know. So let's go with Smitha. Actually, why don't you tell us about what you provided here? So what was your object?
Sure. Yeah, the one I did for 2127. It's funny, I sketched it before I even saw your slide about 2127 and the futures of leaving Earth, and it happened to align really well. I can't remember the words that I used.
I think, is it the moon base?
Yeah, I mean, it is the moon base. I'm just trying to remember what I submitted in the 4, but yeah, it's the Cookie Monster moon. So I love Cookie Monster. He got me through grad school, like just videos for, anyway. So yeah, my idea was that, you know, we would be at a point where we would be establishing ourselves in other parts of the solar system, but we would do it with an explicitly decolonialist approach. Ideally, it would be led by people of color who, you know, truly embody that. Right, exactly, whoever highlighted that. And then tying it into food, I mean, I was going to sketch something about like some sort of like aquaponics, hydroponics garden under one of those humps on top. But yeah, the main idea also being that we go forward embracing our cultural traditions from, you know, indigenous groups, native groups, different cultural groups around the world, but we have to re-envision them in a new techno-social context of the future, but we still remain true to our roots. So there's not an appropriative aspect to it, but just taking them into the next generation in a way where people are able to honor and own their own cultures in the process.
Thank you for sharing. What problems do you anticipate?
What problems do I anticipate?
Or encounter, or what problems could you foresee your solution creating, rather?
Oh God. Well, I guess you'd be working with limited resources, right? You can only go with what you take with you, and then you have to build. I mean, I'm a huge science fiction nerd, so it's yeah. You take what you can from the Earth, then you have to build it first, and then from there you can, you know, set up the building blocks to flourish. So how do you prioritize what goes first? I guess that's the first one. I do think of this from a cultural appropriation context, since Indian culture tends to be very heavily appropriated in the West. So, but then also hearing about like Elon Musk and the whole like colonize Mars thing just really rubs me the wrong way. So
yeah, we use the wrong words for talking about space, don't we?
Yeah, but the thing is, I don't think people really really interrogate what those words mean. And you have to be so careful about this next era. That's why I made sure not to say like settle, colonize.
Yeah.
You know?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool. Heck yeah, I'm loving it. Thank you.
And Cookie Monster rules.
All right, next we'll go to Shannon.
For this time period, I was imagining a future where decomposers and scavengers are really revered in our culture, because by that point, sort of the systems of nutrient recycling and that service that they provide has become so apparent to people as like a really necessary function for food production and all kinds of ecological, systems to function. And so, yeah, just kind of imagining what kind of cultural shift that would be if, we kind of replaced metaphors in our language to be around mushrooms and nutrient recycling and all of the related ecological processes that go along with that, instead of like in our current language, we have all these metaphors about like war and combat. I don't know that those are directly related or if this makes sense, but yeah, so I'm kind of trying to think about cultural and language shifts related to this idea of like closed loop systems in ecology.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And if I may ask, what problems do you think your solution will create?
I don't know. It's a hard question.
Yeah, this is the question we have trouble asking ourselves.
Yeah, what problems would it create?
Or might it create, like unforeseen problems? Like, can you imagine that it might create problems down the road?
Maybe to help frame it in terms of trade-offs, right?
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. I guess it could always be like co-opted in a way that I'm not foreseeing. Like it could, I'm kind of imagining it as like an alternative to this like patriarchal culture somehow, but it could just be like co-opted into the patriarchy and not be as cool as I'm imagining it. I don't know.
Yeah. No, that's definitely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
I love that idea.
Thanks.
Can I call on someone we haven't heard of sorry, I haven't heard of you either, but how about Essie? We called on earlier and they had just joined us, so didn't get to share. Would you mind sharing this time, Essie? If you're still present. Sometimes people get stuck in the time warp. They don't come back, all of them. And then they're still on the call technically, but like maybe not totally, which I understand. So how about Coleman?
Hey, what's going on, y'all?
What's up?
I guess I was thinking in like for this time frame that we were laying out.
Could you come closer to your mic?
Yeah, man, of course. Sorry about that.
No problem, thank you.
In this time period, if we're like colonizing, maybe, or not colonizing, but like we've moved to the moon, I feel like any science fiction that I've read, it feels like there's always a little bit of a rub on who gets either privileged to go out to space, like it's either the clandestine place to be, and people are left behind on Earth, or it's a place where people are still like there's a discrepancy between, the back home versus where you're at. So like there's definitely like loss of like home spirits and like how you're feeling. And I feel like if we were like in space, we would have a hard time actually growing food, and be in space would still be like learning how to do that, and probably feel disenfranchised about like actually having access to what we consider food, and probably still eating like freeze-dried space food. So like Earth is probably, if we've like hit a good point where we're growing food well and the ecosystems are rebounding, we have like traditional farming that's happening on Earth, and then scientists have come up with a way of you pulverize into a paste, but you can 3D print it and ship it up in space so that people can have the privilege of eating like whole foods, and it's coming from a natural source on Earth, and so that they have like a way to get to growing food in space.
That's awesome. So sort of like a food transporter, but almost with technology that we have today, somewhat.
Yeah. I feel like we're not there. Yeah, I feel like at 21, 27, we're still not there yet doing like anything cool. Like I want to
like teleportation.
Teleporting. Yeah, I feel like we're a little bit off. The next couple years, maybe.
So you talked a little bit about some of the problems you think that your solution solves. Do you foresee any problems it might create?
Yeah, for sure. I think depending on that dynamic of like who gets to be in space, whether it's a privilege or if it's something that is like a working class kind of thing, or like where that value is, it can definitely place like stress on the food system, on who gets access to it. And whether that stress is like one or the other. So it definitely is something to think about.
Right. Awesome. Thank you. Is anyone, we're very close to being done, but is there anyone who is like dying to share their object and thinks that they could share in like 2 minutes? And I'm gonna give this a hot 5 seconds. Because if no one is like chomping at the bit to share, then we could have a short conversation.
Let's get into it.
Cool. So please, yeah, feel free to unmute yourself, and just like last time, popcorn, stuff that you heard from other folks. This was, I really enjoyed what people were sharing this time. The farther we get into the future, we can get a little weirder. So yeah, please just, any comments, anything you want to add or bring up.
I would have a caveat. If we're going to be populating other parts of the solar system, and yet we posit that we're going to still be quite dependent upon resources from the Earth, and perhaps that's our inability to recognize that there may be resources elsewhere when we get there. But it looked, from my initial thinking, it seems like we're being terribly exploitive of the poor people left on Earth. Is this a reverse colonization, or how would we term it? We're going to be dependent upon high tech. High tech depends upon a lot of things, including extractive industries, which we would love to get rid of. But we're talking minerals and resources that take a continued degradation of the Earth. So I think that as we look at the potential or possibilities for the far future, we need to see how we can work through those things. And as we make our plans, try to minimize that. Going back to I just finished reading something called Braiding Sweetgrass, which is probably not which really talks about the indigenous way of viewing the relationship with the earth, which is that everything is a gift, and never taking more than what you need, never taking more than half. And I think if we could cultivate that type of a perception here, we might not need to go elsewhere. We also probably need to think a little bit about population control, because that definitely is going to become a problem with global warming, unless we have that completely controlled by 2117. And I guess we better hope that we do, because it's going to, although we will open up some areas to food production, particularly if we're going to go to a plant-based diet, it's going to shut out others. So it's just multiplicity of things that we would actually have to deal with as we move to this wonderfully envisioned future. I really like the appreciation of the nutrient recycling. We have a place out in the country, and we always have turkey vultures flying overhead. They're omnipresent. I don't know that I've ever seen one in Pittsburgh. We're just too efficient with our waste removal. We expect the garbage.
I have them out here in Braddock.
Okay, well, I'm in Portland. I don't know why I haven't seen them. It's my limited view of the sky. But we just expect to wrap our garbage in plastic and take it away. And populating the area with more turkey vultures would be a really good idea. Although
yeah.
neighbors might not appreciate the stench.
Right. Well, I'm wondering, something I really appreciate about what you said is how can we use, or a question that I picked out of your comments is like, how can we use a gift economy approach, right? Like Robin Wall Kimmerer mentions in her writing. If we were to go out into space, like how could we base space exploration or like our natural human curiosity reach for the stars, but do so from a space of understanding gift and deep appreciation for the gifts of the earth. So that's a future I want to live in. But can we do that? How would we do that? Those are such interesting questions to me.
Something we're working on now to have that attitude calculated by 2127.
Yeah, we'll see.
Well, it would benefit us even if we don't go live on the moon.
Right. What are you gonna say, Tacumba?
I think I want to connect this back to something Cynthia mentioned about, the movement of people as a result of climate change, and particularly like the opportunity, as the Luz put it, where we could look at this is opportunity to develop new weapons, particularly. We recognize if, people were to adopt Americans' consumption patterns, we would need several planets, right? And that's not feasible. And as woman was just talking, sorry for not having it. Could you repeat your name, please?
I'm Rebecca.
Rebecca, you just mentioned, just the feasibility of that and that not being practical, and how that then shifts concerns to things along the lines of population control, which can be a bit divisive within a current context. So I think, by reframing growth, consumption, what dictates the good life in ways that explore other purviews of, what folks have thought about that could be a possible jumping off point, I'll say, if we recognize the limits of our particular way of being. We make up 5% of the global population, consume about 25% of the resources, make up about 25% of the global economy, quote unquote. But that's not necessarily something that everyone can emulate, nor should they. So I think that it kind of, I'm glad we had a chance to talk about some of these things. And certainly before we wind down here, if folks would, because I'm gonna go on to the next one, would be interested in continuing this conversation, we would definitely love to jump into the future again with you all. So we're gonna drop a link down in the chat. If you could fill out a poll, letting us know what times will be good for you. We would definitely we intend on following up and have another session, contingent upon everyone's responses from who joined us today. And I also want to speak about a few books mentioned here. So these are awesome books to provide some perspective. Again, being that we certainly essentialized large chunks of history within a particular context. These books are certainly what we recommend that we've read and been in communion with to help foster deeper understanding about particular things we might have left out, obscured, or just not given enough attention to in general. So the first book is The Foodie's Guide to Capitalism by Eric Holt Jimenez. And, it's an excellent book. We're given an intricate context of, the disconnection between food justice and food sovereignty and the economics behind food, and really crystallizes some of the first order issues with the food system, I would say, within context of like social justice movements, peasant farming movements, etc. Next, we had the Freedom Farmers book by Monica M. White. Particularly I heard co-ops mentioned before. This is an excellent exposition to like African American farmers in the early to mid 20th century, and talks about a lot of the movement work that was happening around land and how cooperative movements that came out of that process, and the legacy of that. Next, we have Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States. This is an excellent book It's self-explanatory, so I won't even attempt to add anything on, but I definitely recommend this if you're one seeking to, Fitz, you mentioned indigenization. So I think it's certainly helpful to kind of ground you in that perspective. Next, we have Colonialism and Post-colonialism, written by Nina Lumba. This is a particularly interesting book, and it really gets into some of the inner dynamics of colonialism, the psychoanalytic state of a colonial subject. So it definitely weaves in a lot of contemporary thinkers from the last 100 years on, their thoughts. And again, just in terms of going deep on certain things we might have left out, obscured, or not touched on. These are certainly readings that will help do that. So you can go to the next slide.
I was going to recommend before we move on, just momentarily, I forgot to put in there, just Farming While Black, and all of these books are about, it's kind of futurism too, right? It's not just about the past, not just about the present, but how to build a more just, more equitable future. And, looking at sci-fi authors, like I mentioned Octavia Butler earlier, looking at Afrofuturism, you can hit that up on Wikipedia if you're not sure what that word means. And looking at Indigenous futurism too, there's all sorts of futurisms from all over the world, South Asian, Southeast Asian, Hispanic futurisms, whatever. And there are great, sci-fi compendium books out there if you want to look into any of that stuff. Because that, for me, like Smith mentioned earlier, has been a huge good medicine for imagining the future.
So that, as we said before,
I left a note in there for
myself. Please join us for more Food Futures work, including this the chat that we're looking to have once everybody fills that out. And we have our emails here, so if you have any questions, me and Fitz, you do work on urban farm and homewood. So in terms of topics pertaining to some of the things surfaced here, we certainly love to be in contact about how we can collaborate or be a support.
And if since we had to have such a small group today, if you know anyone who wanted to be here but couldn't, or would just like to talk to me and Tacumba about all the cool stuff we talked about today, I know we all know people that were like, they'd love that person, then please put them in touch with us. That would be amazing. We love talking to new people about cool ideas. So yeah, I think that's it for us.
Thank you all for your time and daring to imagine with us, and I'm hoping to have a future conversation.
Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.